Before our Torah reading, I'm going to invite Dr. Judith Cates to introduce the Torah reading. How blessed we are to have so many teachers and rabbis in this community that can teach Torah. And one of the teachers of all of us is Dr. Judith Cates, and we love hearing her Torah.
Yeah. Thank you, Rav Claudia. Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom. As I offer the kavanah for our Torah reading this morning, I'm guessing that Rav Claudia asked me to do this because she knows that I've been thinking for many years about the connections between what we read in our sacred writings and this moment in our sacred calendar, especially in the book that Gail Reamer and I edited called Beginning Anew. In some ways, that title says it all. The Torah portion and the holiday are expressions of our hope, our longing for possibility, for a fresh start, for a sense that there's always a new chapter in our story. But the Torah reading and the holiday are, of course, much more complicated, and every year brings a new turn in the kaleidoscope of our awareness, a new perspective on the connection between them. This year again, I see fully the power of the opening verses of our Rosh Hashanah reading as we're drawn into the deep waters of relationship between fully human beings and God. Here we enter into the fullest, most unqualified moment in the complex relationship between Sarah and God. Va'Adonai pakad et Sarah. Now, Adonai took account of, paid attention to Sarah, as God had said. Adonai dealt with, did for Sarah, as God had spoken. God here pays attention to Sarah in direct, unambiguous fulfillment of promises to her. And although Abraham gives the child the name, as God had instructed him to do, Yitzchak, Sarah declares its meaning. Now Sarah said, God has made laughter, tzchok, for me. All who hear of it will laugh for me. Just as she constructed meaning for her childlessness, declaring it the active intervention of God in her life, Adonai has obstructed me from giving birth. She now sees the transformation of her sorrow into laughter as God's gift specifically to her. With a shift in emphasis to God has made laughter for me, we can also hear her joy in the realization that it is indeed God who has acted on her behalf, making laughter for her, both the child whose name is laughter and the joyous surprise she shares with all who hear of it. So we open our reading with the extraordinary in what we might think is ordinary. Two human beings have joined together and a child has been born. But this, we are told, is evidence that God fulfills promises. The result of God's taking account of Sarah is that a passionately desired, unbearably long-deferred wish is granted. Sarah became pregnant and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and by the way, her old age. What greater reassurance could we ask for on the day of judgment? What more poignant reminder of the ever-present possibility of renewal on the day of celebrating creation? The Hebrew verb used in our opening verse, pakad, Adonai pakad et Sarah, which I translated as took account of or paid attention to, can also be translated remembered. When we hear the verse as God remembered Sarah, we recognize an inspiring example for Rosh Hashanah, which in the Torah is called Yom Zichron Tru'ah, the day of remembering with blasts of the shofar, and our rabbis called Yom HaZikaron, the day of memory or of remembering. And yet, This Torah passage opens up to much greater complexity. In past years, I've spoken about this through the difficulties in the relationship between Sarah and God. This year, I'm drawn, or maybe pushed, into thinking more fully about what becomes a painful sequel to the joyful story of new birth, which we are also about to encounter literally within minutes as we read the biblical text. Why is it also essential for us to enter into this story too on this day? Sarah clearly understands that her child fulfills God's promises of continuing covenant with Abraham's descendants. And she, supported by God's intervention, acts to ensure that Abraham also accepts this. But her vision and her activism exact an enormous price in suffering for others and for her. And our Torah reading pushes us into confronting this in the story of the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael from the household, the near death of Abraham's son, and the suffering of Hagar. I'm drawn to a powerful essay by the poet-anthropologist Ruth Behar, which we published in Beginning Anew. It's called Sarah and Hagar, the heel prints upon their faces. Behar quotes the African-American poet Audre Lorde. What woman here is so enamored of her own oppression that she cannot see her heel print upon another woman's face? What woman's terms of oppression have become precious and necessary to her as a ticket into the fold of the righteous, away from the cold winds of self-scrutiny? Behar goes on to say that the story of Sarah and Hagar is a story about women wronging women, a story so sad, so sorrowful, one that teaches us that women who have the potential to bring each other into the world also have the potential to oppress one another, to leave their heel prints upon each other's faces. This is not only about women, it's about all of us as human beings and as Jews. As a community encountering our foundational stories, we're drawn into these dark waters immediately after the inspiring light of birth and new creation, in Ruth Behar's words, to awaken us as Jewish listeners, to awaken in us as Jewish listeners both the humility and the courage to stand before the cold winds of self-scrutiny and act essential to the spirit of the days of awe. The story of Sarah and Hagar, she says, gives all of us a fundamental basis for tshuva, returning from the sanctuary of Jewish penitence to the wider world with an altered empathy for those we have wronged, a renewed sense of commitment to social justice. What feels most compelling to me this year is that our Torah demands that we actively embrace the hard reality of our human condition. We have to hold and learn from conflicting experiences of who we are and who we can be. As we speak and listen to this Torah, this teaching in community, we teach ourselves and each other to grow into full humanity. Shana Tova.